Julie Cunningham. How are you?
Good morning. I'm well.
Yeah, what time is it? Like 8:30?
It's early.
Hell of a way to start a Thursday? Thursday.
Wednesday.
Yeah, I'm trying to rush. Trying to get to the weekend, go shooting with Mark and Sean. So one of the goals with doing these podcasts is to dive deeper into the community to help people get to know one another a little bit better. Where I'd like to start with you is just your personal professional background, because we'll end up tying that, I think, to how that path maybe merged with coming over to 906 and getting into the events, etc. So why don't we start there? Let's talk about who you are, where you've been, and what you're doing.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense to start there. When I added up, I've been in education a long time, like over 30 years. And I used to be a high school science teacher at one point in my life. And since I've been in Michigan, I've mostly worked in informal education or in coaching adults in the classroom, so teachers in the classroom. And I currently work in informal education and STEM education with parents, families, students, teachers.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What's the difference between being a ninth grade science teacher and informal education? How do you define informal?
So I'm not in a K-12 school system. I'm not in a classroom. I don't answer to a principal or a superintendent. I don't have the same sort of criteria. I have a lot more autonomy where I am now, and we're not grading students. So in that sense, I don't have those same criteria or those same goals when I work with kids.
Is it safe to say that in informal education, you're not being handed a curriculum that you have to transfer to the students?
Right. I'm not being handed a curriculum. We have a lot of autonomy over what we do with students. Because it's STEM education, it's not even really a curriculum generally that's taught. Not never taught, but right, like it's already separate from what schools do generally. And because we have a maker space, it's real informal. It's really a different experience for students, and that allows it to be an enrichment experience or extra, something that parents or students might seek out.
So are they opting in? Do they have to pay for it?
Sometimes they have to pay for it. Sometimes it's nominal, just enough for some skin in the game. But yes, they're opting in. Either their teacher opts them in or their parent opts them in, or I'm sure the students have some say in whether they'll go or not, right? But usually the parent would register them or the teacher would bring their classroom.
Oh, so in some cases the teacher bringing their classroom. Do you have any sense? This is a question I've wondered. So K through 12, let's say traditional education, I think it's safe to say that people feel like that's owed to them. We're going to give this to you. It's not something that can be withheld from them, right? Would you agree with that?
Right. I think we feel for the greater good of the society, right? Like it would be, I don't know about owed to them, but it would be in the best interest of society that everybody has a public education.
Well, it's an amenity that's going to be provided.
Yes.
And there's also on the back end for the families and the children, they don't really necessarily have the ability to opt out unless they're homeschooling.
Right.
So the parents are expected to send the kids. So there's
right.
a bit of a quandary there.
Compulsory.
Right? Yeah. What I wonder where I'm going with this is the difference between K through 12, where you kind of feel like you got to do this, there's no choice, versus informal education, where kids are showing up because they want to, or classes are taking a field trip to do something with you, and they're interested in doing this. I guess that's an assumption. Do you see any difference in buy-in from students and families in the two contrasting environments?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been in a classroom in quite a while, but I would say the difference in buy-in, I think, so there's some students that are going to buy in to school, whether it's informal ed or K-12 education, right? The students that potentially enjoy school, probably are good at school. I mean, I was one of those students, right? So I like to learn new things. I think it's the students that really, and I don't know if it's specific to informal ed or really specific to our space because we're very open-ended and we give students a lot of autonomy. But students who tend to not do terribly well in the classroom for whatever reason really often shine with us. It's a lot of hands-on. It's a lot of we get to make our own decisions. Our no is generally a safety no, not a time constraint no, not a material constraint no, not a we don't have enough time. Like that's not our thing in our space, right? So students have a lot of individuality, a lot of autonomy to do their own projects, and I think that resonates with a certain type of student. We do have teachers say to us, like, this child isn't terribly successful in the classroom, and maybe they even worried about bringing them on a field trip, right?
Why are they worried about bringing them on a field trip?
Right, because maybe they're worried about how their attention might be spread thin over 25 students, and that student might take more of their time or more of their attention, and so they might potentially be more difficult to bring on a field trip. But those students tend to do really well. And I don't know if that's so much a function of informal ed or their interest or the fact that we have this space that looks sort of industrial and kids can really move around.
Do you think different learning styles come into play where, a child who struggles in the K through 12, the typical curriculum-based education can go into a space that's more hands-on, less, I guess, in some degree, or what I'm hearing, maybe less structured.
Right. I think that less structured, fewer constraints, right? We don't have just a half an hour for whatever it is that you're working on. We generally have a bigger chunk of time, or your project can go on over several weeks if you're going to come back over several weeks.
You said that you're not grading them also, right?
Right. We're not grading. There's no...
Do you think that reduces the pressure or anxiety performatively?
I'm sure it does.
Kids?
Yeah, I'm sure it does. We used to do, when we first opened, we used to do a lot of engineering challenges, which still were built, right? But engineering challenges, when you say the tallest or the fastest or the whatever, tend to have a right answer. Some kids do better than others. Somebody comes across as the winner, right? Mm-hmm. And we've since gone to the challenges or we call it design thinking. The design thinking opportunity or challenge, you only make a prototype. So you can talk away a lot of the mistakes or problems with your prototype, right? You can communicate, well, I didn't have enough time, or I didn't have the right materials, or they made me make this out of cardboard, and maybe this is not the best material for my prototype. But yet you can talk about your prototype as what it would be if you had the resources to make the final product. And I think that takes a lot of stress off, right? It's not the final product.
You know what's interesting on that, when you just start talking about prototyping, is I think when you're in the prototype phase of anything, failure is an accepted piece of developing prototypes, because you're inherently saying from the onset, this is a prototype, this is not the final product. But we're working toward refining the prototypes to eventually get to a final product. What if we approached education that way? And what if we taught that mindset that way, even if, now that I'm saying it, and this may somewhat be baked into a lot of the 906 Adventure Team ethos, statements, culture, etc. But if you're constantly looking at this version of yourself today as just simply another prototype, but not the end product, it just seems like it gives a lot more freedom to a person.
Right. And iteration is the expectation, right? So if it doesn't work, you change something.
Right.
No big deal, because you're not done.
Yeah, that's interesting. Can we step back for a sec to STEM? Can you?
Sure.
What is STEM?
Yeah. So, the acronym stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. And people who work in those fields would probably lean towards saying that means you're doing science or math or engineering, right? I say we work in STEM education. So I talk about it as being the things between those letters. So it's not, we might be doing some science, we might be doing some math, we might be using technology to solve a problem, we might be working on something that requires some engineering, But also it's really just problem solving, right? It's really just you've got an opportunity or you've got a challenge or you've got a need and you need to figure out how you can meet that need or solve that problem by creating a prototype. So we usually have a client that the kids get if it's a field trip, and they need to decide, what does that client need from me? And every kid could decide that client needs something different. And then they need to figure out the solution to that client's need. And then they need to design a prototype, something the client could interact with if the client were really present. So we think of it more like you're designing a solution, you're communicating the results. In a sense, you're doing a little marketing, right, of your solution. You might be communicating. That could be English language arts. You might be using technology. You might not be using technology. But always you're problem solving.
Interesting. How big a part of traditional learning is teaching kids that art of problem solving?
Well, I think it depends on the classroom and the instructor, right? Like for some of us, we would say you can't do learning if you don't teach kids how to do that for themselves. And by the end of the year, they shouldn't need me, right? My whole job should be to get them to be independent and to be able to do whatever it is that the learning objectives say they can do by the end of the year. But I mean, a lot of that depends on probably the grade level you're teaching and the content you're teaching and your teaching philosophy.
You said that they are perhaps, the goal is to get the kid to not need them by the end of the year.
Yeah,
right?
I like to, I like to not be needed by the end of the year, right? That to me is a successful, and I most recently I've taught freshmen.
Important?
Why? Because that's what they're supposed to be doing by the time that they leave your classroom, especially I think because I always taught high school or at the college level. Yeah, I mean, why would I want them to need me forever? Like I want them to be independent and to think on their own and be able to problem solve. And hopefully that's the knowledge I've transferred to them by the time they leave me.
I'll take the position that I think a lot of parents take right now. My son is 7 years old. He's a child. He needs me. I have to make these decisions for him. It's my job to keep him safe. That sounds, there's a stark contrast between what I just said and what you're sharing.
I don't think so. Like it is your job to keep them safe. And in the classroom, it's my job as an instructor to keep them safe. Absolutely.
Let's define
but
safe.
Also, it is my job to make an independent, creative thinker who can problem solve and go out into life and be successful. And if I always do things for them, if that's my definition of keeping them safe, if I don't let them learn to do it themselves, then I don't think that I'm being successful. And
as an educator,
right. And I don't think that is keeping them safe. That's keeping them in a box.
What's building a box around them? Yeah. Shrinking. You know, I've said before, we've talked about this, that I think that everything we teach them to be afraid of shrinks their worldview or shrinks their world. You know, it moves the walls in. So I agree with you. I think that education, whether you're a teacher or a parent or a coach, whatever your role is within a child's life or just within any general person's life, much the same as 906 Adventure Team is continuously striving to do, it is to create self-supported, independent, resilient, confident, community-minded individuals. But as we've learned over the last 11 years, that's a complicated task.
It is.
What sort of, I'm curious, because we're talking about all the education for the kids, the youth. Is there education for parents? Do you have parents, I'm assuming you do, that you have parents seeking like education? How can I support, we've talked about this, if you have this environment at school or at STEM where you're trying to create dynamic problem-solving children, that's great, but your interaction with them is limited to what? 2 hours every day? And then if they go back home to where they're, or to another school, traditional K through 12, and they're dropped back into this ecosystem that is not reinforcing those lessons. You know, we've talked about it with like Adventure Team, youth resilience programming. you're fighting an uphill battle. Because if that each touch point throughout their day and their life, their week, has to be supporting there has to be some continuity. How do we help support parents? Is there support out there for parents?
Well, one of our favorite programs that we run is we're open for families, right? We're just an open makerspace for families,
Okay.
and we will put out materials, or we will help people find the appropriate materials if they have a project in mind. But that's exciting because oftentimes it's the kids who are regularly in our space, and so the parents are only coming every other Saturday. And the kids lead the parents through how to behave and act in the space, and the kids lead the parents through their projects, which is, I think that's almost the best education. Like, no one sat the parent down and said, this is how you behave in this space, right? But the modeling of the child with their adult that's with them is really interesting.
Are the rules of engagement in the makerspace clear? Is there any sort of statement of etiquette or behavior?
No.
Okay.
I mean, no. Even when just classrooms of students come, we're really just, our only rules are safety rules.
What kind of safety rules?
Like how to use when they're young kids, how to use a hot glue gun, or like we have these knives for cutting that are sort of like what you use on a pumpkin, right? Like how to use a knife appropriately. Or if you want to use the drill, come see us because we need to put a battery in the drill and set you up for using the drill. And so just, safety things like that. We almost never have any behavior problems. We almost never have any problems with kids sharing materials because there's enough things to go around. There's another place to look for what you need to do, right? We almost never have kids wanting to partner on projects and not, and watch, where one student would watch the other do the project because it's fun.
They want to be hands-on.
Yeah, they want to be hands-on. They want to share their ideas. They want to create their ideas. And I think, a lot of our mantra comes down to, again, autonomy, right? Providing them with the autonomy to share their idea, to create their idea, to tell you about what they want to make.
So you use the word autonomy a lot.
I do use the word autonomy a lot.
A lot. Define it for us and build it out so people that listen to this understand what you're saying. Because in your reference point, what is it?
Well, I feel like I even talk about it with coaches a lot in 906, right? So anytime you can give that child the ability to make a decision for themselves about their learning or about their life, like, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you assume competence? And why wouldn't you step back as an adult? Sure, they have to be safe, but also kids want to take control over their lives. They don't get a lot of control over their lives in the school day or oftentimes any other place, right? Let them decide within reason. How am I going to go about doing that?
Do you think kids, this is an opinion, do you think the kids are getting less control over their life through their own independent decision making?
Probably. We schedule a lot of their day for them, it feels like, or many adults schedule their children's day for them, right? So, they're at school all day, so already that is mostly not within their control. And then if they go to after-school events, right, there's probably some amount of control.
How do you weigh the value of structure versus non-structure?
Well, there has to be some structure, and kids have to be. I'm not suggesting kids should just not be safe. That as adults, that we shouldn't provide a safe environment.
You're
but
not
also,
saying they should not run amok.
Right. Okay. But also, in our space, we can give very limited directions and then address, right? Not every kid needs every direction. Like, we can address some things individually when they have questions. We don't have to scaffold the whole. We could spend a half an hour or 45 minutes telling them everything they need to know about our space. At which point they're just going to forget what they heard and go off and have the same questions anyway, right? Why should we do that? We talk about the few tools, the few sort of rules, right? And then we can address things as they come up.
So in your space, it sounds like they're more hands-on, which means they're
busy, right?
They're busy. They're doing something, problem solving, testing, trying this, trying that. In that setting, is there less monologue from you or an educator, less direction.
Yes, we work really hard to minimize that because, again, like the kids aren't hearing that anyway. They're looking around the space at all the things they could potentially do, and you're going to make them sit and listen to directions? I mean, no way are they absorbing that, right? Like, let's get started. And some kids start with a whiteboard and a marker. Some kids start with a pencil and a piece of paper. But why does every kid have to start with a pencil and a piece of paper or a whiteboard and a marker? Some kids start by getting their materials and manipulating them and feeling like, how does this work?
Right.
And that's autonomy, right? I get to decide how I'm getting started.
Yeah. How much do you think, this is speculating, but how much do you think of that desire, the desire we have as adults to, and I'm not saying the kids shouldn't be safe. They should be safe, but I think that there's a wide range. I think a lot of times our personal comfort with things, we reflect it onto our kids. Mm-hmm. So if we have phobias of something, we tend to pass it on. But do you think that it comes down to, I guess I'll try to simplify the question. Do you think that the desire to sometimes over-communicate to kids, which means over-manage what they're doing, their thinking, their process, is that just coming, because I don't think parents or anybody's doing it on purpose to hurt anybody. Is it coming from a lack of understanding how to communicate with children, or just where children are cognitively at this point in their development versus, me as a 51-year-old man? I mean, we're in two different universes, right? Do you think it's just a lack of understanding that? Or what's the...
I think most adults do, and parents, educators, do the best that they can every single day with the resources that they have, right? So potentially that's where their understanding is, that's where their comfort is.
Yep.
I mean, look, I like control of my life as much as the next person, right? And I know that I have to, I'm pretty good at controlled chaos in the classroom and a noise level that's pretty high and kids that aren't all doing the same thing, right? But I also know that as an adult, I have to work on my biases and the things that set me off in order to be a fair adult when I work with students, right? Like everybody has things probably from how we grew up, probably from our life experiences. And so I have to reflect on that regularly and ask myself, why do I care? What would happen if I didn't have that rule? What would happen if I didn't say that thing? What would happen if I didn't have that expectation? Would somebody really be hurt, or would the child just have one more sort of space in which they could do their thing and nothing bad would happen?
I think you said something important. You need to reflect on your biases. So self-awareness, self-reflection. And I think that's the piece sometimes that misses, because by doing that, I think that that's a position of humility. It's basically you're sort of checking your own ego. Like, do I really have it all figured out? What part of my decision making is driving me to do this? How is my direction to the child or the words I'm using with the child impacting the child in a positive or negative way, right? I think that's really important. So that's fantastic. There's a lot. So I've said this before, and I think it's pretty accurate. Our programming for kids, Adventure Team programming with 906 Adventure Team, it does tend to attract educators. From your perspective, like, I could give my own opinions on it, but I'm not an educator. You went to school. So two-part question. You went to school for a particular reason. What was that? And then I guess, how does that tie to what we do through the Adventure Team? How does that become a vehicle for doing what you want to do for children? Yeah,
so I went to school. I have a science degree originally and then went back to school. So I worked in science fields for a little while, decided to go back to school for my teaching certificate, and then eventually went for my master's degree. But I think I've learned just as much from either on-the-job training or potentially things that I've sought out since then that fit my interests in education. I've been focused most recently on how students learn in the natural world, and also watching adults, teachers sort of step back and let the children, I mean, if I was going to say the word autonomy again, I would say it there, but like let the children have the experiences, right? Before we tell them what experience to have, or before we fix it for them, or before we entertain them potentially, especially in the natural world. Like, why are we entertaining children in the woods? There's plenty of things in the woods that we can have an adventure with them and not have to entertain them or change the outing for them. So I think I've learned as much since then as I have in my formal education. I mean, I like to learn new things, so like formal education has been a part of my life for a long time, but also I recognize I learn from the children and I learn from other situations that I seek out. Your second part of the question was, how does that fit with what we do in Adventure Team?
Yeah, I mean, how does it, I've had teachers say that they feel like through the Adventure Team program, they're able to do some of the things I got into teaching to do that they don't feel that they can necessarily do day to day, which is an interesting statement to me. I don't know how to unpack that.
I think one of the things in Adventure Team is we really can look at individual growth. Like, we have riders often, whether we ask them to articulate it or not, set their own goals. And maybe it's a hill they want to ride, or maybe it's a sand patch they want to not have to walk their bike through, or whatever it is, right? Like, we often focus on individual goals and not competition. So I think that would resonate. I mean, that resonates with me as an educator. I think that would resonate with educators, that individuality of you're part of a team, but also your individual goals matter, and the ethos of that self-supported, but probably resonates with me as an educator. So the idea that I am taking youth out in the woods for an adventure on a bike, but they are carrying their water and their snack. Like, they are somewhat responsible for conveying when they've had enough riding, when they're ready for their snack, which route they want to go on, what they want to walk versus ride, right? Like, so that the sort of self-supported ethos of coming to there prepared, doing your ABCD bike check, wearing your helmet, your bike's in working order. Some of those things I think would resonate with with an educator. So you're not doing everything for them, right? Just the idea, I think, of being out in the woods, off your device, having a good time, enjoying yourself, potentially being sort of silly or goofy and having fun while you're learning, right? It's not totally structured. Yes, we look at a bike skill each night and a character skill each night, but it's like not 2 hours of every minute is completely structured.
Well, it seems, I think that there's a pretty solid interplay between structure and then no structure. Base camp is structured. There's a handful of rules that are clear. Mm-hmm. But really, once the leads leave base camp with the kids, it's up to them. Like, the adventure is going to unfold. They're going to do what they're going to do. And that is interesting. I think for kids, when you look at kids coming into like week one, or let's say orientation night, which I've always felt has been a positive in that first night, you remove some of the anxiety and the pressure by just having to be a walkthrough, get to meet everybody, kind of get name with a face, some familiarity. Parents can ask some questions, look at the bikes to make sure that they're functioning properly before we ride. And then you start riding the following week. And I think, to your point, and I want to talk about this because the groups of kids. So we don't create a hierarchy of, best, good, kind of good, not good at all. That's not how we group the kids. The kids are grouped by age, which then inherently means you end up with a wide range of skill sets within those groups. To speak to that a little bit from your perspective as an educator, what's the pro to that? What's the con to that setup?
Well, I think one of the struggles for many of the coaches are, what do I do with this wide variety of riders, right? So you have to be a little bit more creative as a coach and a lead to think about how to use the strengths of your riders to the advantage of the team. And what I mean by that is, maybe you're, well, first of all, one rider's probably not, even if they're a better rider, they're probably not good at everything. But
Sure.
when they are good at something, right, having them potentially come back and ride at the back, right, and maybe practice something else while some of the other riders get a chance to be more in the lead. And even the very young kids, like I mostly coach the 5 and 6 year olds, just even having the patience to be a teammate, maybe that's what they're working on. So you come back and you ride at the back. And if you give a little more space between yourself and the bike in front of you, you can do your ride the way that you want to do without slowing yourself down, right?
Sure.
To wait for somebody else. But having the patience to even recognize that. And then also, there are still skills that you are working on, even if it's not this particular skill that we're working on tonight. So I think there's both challenges and opportunities to that variety of skill levels. I think for adults, it's often a challenge to really think about how can I keep everybody engaged and still have enough skills we're working on for my strongest riders while not having my weakest riders feel like they're left out.
Yeah, I've always felt like having the mix or the blend of abilities, that the positive in that is for the kids who maybe can't do something. Let's say in a group of 10, you have 3 kids that can climb the hill to the top without putting a foot down. And then the other 7 are, a range of how far they can get up the hill all the way to a couple kids that can't even pedal 3 times up the hill before they're off and pushing all the way up. Having that blend of abilities, the one thing it takes off the table for the kids at the back is impossible.
Mm-hmm.
When you take a group of kids, let's say, more traditional hierarchy, skill-based, if you put all the kids that are like brand new or all the kids that can't do X, Y, Z together in one group, and then they get to the hill and everybody in that group is pushing their bike.
Yeah, and that's all they see.
They
don't see anybody else their age
they don't
making
see
it
any
to the top of
success.
the hill, right?
So then what they say is, well, it's impossible, coach. It can't be done. You can't, when you're in the group of 10 and you see a couple kids get off the front and they're up at the top waiting for you.
It's not impossible.
It's not impossible.
Right.
And then I think that what we've been able to do with the programming that has been the positive, particularly for the kids that need more time to develop, is we've had a very supportive team, community-centric culture that's developed. Like Cable used to get up to the top of the hill, my youngest, and while the other kids were working to get to the top, he'd go back down and he'd ride up again.
Ride up with them, yeah.
So it became like, okay, how many times I can do it once? Can I do it twice? So that he's still practicing it to get better.
And that's what I would say is and I think that benefit definitely outweighs any of the challenges that coaches have with the variety of skill levels, right? Being a teammate and being in a group with your peers, with your age group peers, the friendships that form, all of that outweighs any challenges that adults have with the variety of skill levels.
Yeah. Yeah. I also look, the devil's advocate is I've seen this. There are some kids who they don't fit well into that model. They're maybe more type A. They're much more advanced. Like they're more performative minded, driven. So it's not like this is a format that is successful for everybody, but I think that there is a large portion of kids who don't participate in traditional sports who then don't get the benefits of some of that experience of training and doing hard things and improving incrementally on things as you would on like a basketball team. I think that community of kids is exactly what this program has been developed for, which I also believe is the majority of kids for the most part. That's just always been my gut feeling on it. It's there for the kids that, it could be there for the kids that are in traditional sports, but it's more for the kids who still need to get all those fundamental learnings, but they're not going to do it playing baseball.
And some kids just like to ride, right? Like some kids just want to ride in the woods, just like we do.
Well, 100%. When we had that first NICA team in 2016, and there were 34 kids or 35 kids. That was the epiphany, because we had a group of 34 kids. 7 of them were there for performative reasons. They were there to race, they were there to train, and they were there to podium. And then the other 26, 28, whatever the number was, they were there for the social experience, to ride bikes and just be in the woods. So I've said it probably 1,000 times in the last 11 years that neither group got what they wanted, because the front 7 kept having to stop to wait for the rest of the kids. So they're not getting the training that they need. And then all the other kids felt like every ride was a death march, and it wasn't fun. So that's, in 2017, when we came and said, all right, well, the competitive kids, the kids who want to race, there's a particular experience we need to provide them, but we need to create the opportunity for them to have that. And then we needed to create an opportunity for all the other kids, but we didn't have that. There's lots of racing and lots of competitive avenues for kids, whether it's on a bike, off a bike, doing other stuff. But this sort of you versus you competitive format, where you're just teaching the kid to compete against, the prototype that they were last week to improve that prototype, that didn't exist. So that's where initially Adventure Bike Club came from in 2017, which is now sort of morphed into Adventure Team. And I think we've got in 14 or 15 communities. So that's how that came to be. Just trying to create a space for each need for the kids. Well, let's talk about your adventuring.
My adventuring, yeah.
Because in addition to being involved with the youth programming, you're on the board also for the Adventure Team, but you're also an event participant.
Sometimes I'm an event participant, yes.
Remind me, I know you've done Crusher.
Yes.
You've done the EX.
Yes.
Right?
I've never done the mass start, only the EX.
You've done Polar Roll.
Just once.
Yeah, that was the mass start.
Yes.
Let's talk about, because you and I talked about this yesterday, maybe?
Yeah, I don't love a mass start.
You don't love mass starts?
I don't.
You're not alone. What is it about a mass start that just doesn't do it for you?
Well, if it's single track, I always feel like I'm being pushed from behind, right? And I don't want to be pushed from behind or yell, even if no one's like specifically yelling at you, just it feels like, right, like you're being pushed to ride faster, and then I'm just gonna like pull over and let everyone pass me, and that's not the point of a mass start race.
So you feel like you're holding people back?
I feel like I'm holding people back, or not so much in Polar Roll, but some other events that I've done, mass start events, right? If you put too many riders out there on the course, like there is no other way but to feel that way, right? Like no other.
Yeah.
If you put out 75 waves of riders, there's going to be people out on the course. You're never going to. I like the EX. I like to be out there by myself where it's quiet and I'm just competing against myself and the time.
You've done it with a friend.
I've done it with a friend. Yeah, I was trying to decide if I would ever be brave enough to do one by myself, but I do always have a very reliable partner, and we have the same sort of mantra about how we approach the races, so it works well.
So what draws you to doing it? Like let's just say Crusher, because that's the one you've done probably the most, the EX version. What about that? Is it a connection to the outdoors? Is it some personal opportunity or endeavor to improve something in some way, or what's been the draw on Crusher?
Well, I think I was trying to think back to the very first time that we did it, and I think that was during the pandemic, right, when races weren't widely available, and so there definitely was a draw there, because I had been doing other races, mostly triathlons, and there was nothing.
You were doing triathlons?
I did a lot of triathlons.
Do you have photos of that?
Probably.
Okay, we're going to have to look at those.
Anyway, there wasn't anything, right? And some of the other riders so I live in downstate Michigan, some of the other riders were saying, you two should really try this. And it was scary. Like the Crusher was a scary thing. And we didn't know if we could, it was longer than anything we'd ever done. We hadn't ridden in the UP before, right? Just the unknown, the amount of time we were going to be out there, what kind of stuff we were going to be riding on. I mean, we've done other races, my partner and I, where we did, where we used compass, and did adventure type races. So we were pretty sure we could make the GPS thing work, provided that our GPSs kept working.
Right. You're talking about a traditional adventure race?
Right.
Yeah,
so,
gotcha.
I mean, we were pretty sure we could do the navigation piece, I guess is what I'm saying.
This was 2020, right?
I think so.
EX,
Yeah,
COVID.
EX, COVID, right.
So that would have been your first.
Right. And I mean, that was the year that you sent us up that Ramba 3 times. And I was like, really? The 3rd time? Because then I was very close to the end, but I might have quit. No, so just doing something hard and feeling like you had this accomplishment. And we didn't know when we set out to do it if we could finish, right? Would we finish? I mean, anyone that we told or anyone that was waiting for us at the end wasn't sure we could finish or how long we'd be out there.
If you had Rambo was in your first time?
2021?
That was 21.
Okay, that was my first one.
So
then.
21 was your first one. So you're probably referring to...
we did really well on time. We thought we were doing so well, and then that took us like 4 hours or something. That ridiculous.
The last part?
Yeah.
Last bluff?
Yes.
You remember
like the
that?
third time you sent us up that, I was like, you're kidding me. No, you weren't kidding. We weren't kidding.
My favorite part of that ending, it was only like 2 miles long.
Yeah, but it took hours for some of us.
And it broke some people.
Yeah, I imagine.
In September that year, about 10 days a week before Margie, I went out and I rode the 100 alone. And when I got back to Last Bluff, it had just gotten dark. I think it was like 9 o'clock. So I was going through there, and it was funny because at that point, I had spent the whole summer hearing everybody bitch and complain about Last Bluff. And I feel like when I went through Last Bluff that night, it took me an hour and a half or something like that. I feel like I could hear echoes of swearing.
Yeah, all of us. We left it all up there.
I just thought about.
Well, then your GPS didn't work well up there either, right? Because it can't tell
it's so
which.
tight.
Yeah, it's too tight, right? So then you're like, am I? What if I get back and my map shows that I didn't do it all?
So was that the year you guys came to the house after that?
We came.
House.
I think we picked up our beacons at your house before it. Yes.
Okay, you picked them up there. Is that when you came to the backyard with Kim
and Ginger, her mom?
Yeah, and Mom.
And I'm a lead coach in our community now for our 906 adventure team. Like, I had no idea about the youth programming. I came to do an event, right?
In 21.
Yeah.
That was in September. Oh, interesting.
Right.
Well, no, you would have been, sorry. You were in August?
Probably August. We usually do them in August, yeah.
So you had heard about it. That's what kind of turned you on to it.
The event, right.
Yep. Did you, I'm assuming you went to the website or?
I think Kim did that. And I know she told me about the youth program, right? But I think like many people who do the events, I didn't really connect the whole picture.
Yeah. At that time you probably could not have because the websites were still separated. What I'm curious, and maybe you didn't look at this, is it's the tone of the event. So if you hear from people about this event called the Crusher and EX, and you're on your own and you got to use GPS and it's self-supported, nobody's out there to help you. I'm just curious. Well, let's just ask the question, coming out of Crusher in a contrast to other events you've done. I mean, triathlon's extremely structured, right? Mm-hmm. Any mass start that you do is highly structured, generally speaking. Mm-hmm. If there's specific courses marked, it's a lot of times the same course year after year for the most part. How are they different?
Well, I mean, there's no aid stations, right? I mean, that's one obvious way. Generally, I think this is probably not as true for the mass start events for 906, but for the EX events, I mean, you can go all day and not see anyone out there, right? And if you don't have your own support team who's offering you neutral support, you got to carry what you got to carry. I mean, you have to figure out potentially where you're going to get water and have enough calories. And So I think all of those things were something new to think about, right? Like even how are we going to pack our bikes? I mean, we didn't hadn't done any bike packing before then, right? We didn't, just the whole making sure we had enough clothes for the weather or whatever it is that you need, right? And I know the Crusher Field Manual tells you what to carry, so it's not like you have to guess it yourself. But nonetheless, like
Recommends
all
what to
of that
carry.
is right, except the snorkel.
Right,
But
right.
all of that was new for us, right? And downstate, we do a lot of gravel riding, and the Crusher enhanced gravel is not really downstate enhanced gravel riding. So,
Sure.
even, and you could pay a lot of attention or not to what people say you should have for bike components and what kind of bike you should be riding, or you can show up and ride the bike you have and make the best of it. And so all those things in the beginning were a learning curve for us.
So most events, I'm going to say that our female participation in 906 events is 30 to 35%. Most events are not that high.
No.
Why, in your opinion, do we have a higher percentage? What's different? Do you have any take on that? This is the question that I want to be able to get answered by more women.
Well, I think you have a very supportive community, whether it's Mass Start or EX, right? There's a definite community built up around the events who are more supportive than not. I think that's one thing. And secondarily, and I don't know if the percentage is as high on, again, like I don't usually do Mass Start events, right? So I don't know if that percentage is as high on Mass Starts events or EX. But nonetheless, I feel like all of 906's mantra is to assign competence, right? Like you or anyone else associated with 906 wouldn't say, I don't think you're going to finish this race. I mean, you sign competence saying everybody can finish this race. You might be more or less prepared to finish the race, but everybody can finish the race. So I feel like that community and that culture is one thing. I don't know. Who doesn't want to do hard things and accomplish hard things? Like, I don't feel like that's a male or female perspective.
I think the anomaly is you look at how hard the events are. You look at the fact that they are advertised as self-supported. They're placing, I think they're placing a greater demand for preparation on people. If you're going to go out and do a 28-mile road race or gravel race, your typical race that's got aid stations from end to end, is very well marked, has volunteers at every road crossing, it's pretty easy to go out and do that, and there's not a lot of anxiety or fear in that, maybe aside from being afraid that you're holding somebody up or something like that. But there's no danger per se. Those are way different. And so it's like a lot of these races that have a much lower, in my opinion, a much lower barrier of entry versus Crusher, where we're putting you literally into the wilderness alone. So in these other ones that have a lower barrier of entry, the female participation is much lower versus these other much harder events, could be said to be much more dangerous. Your level of preparation has to be higher, and the average participation is better.
Yeah, I think for 906 events, you're also very clear, right, about what the expectation is. So you are going to support yourself out there, right? And you are going to have to be prepared. And so fine, I'll just do the work to be prepared. I mean...
Yeah, I think that's a good point. There's a clear assignment of accountability for our events. And that accountability, your personal safety, preparation, and the outcome, your choices and the outcomes of those choices, we make it very clear. It's on you. And if you're not okay with that, if you're not comfortable with that, it's okay.
Right.
You should stay home. So I do think I think that's definitely important, because I think when you go to a lot of events, the pressure and the accountability is placed on the promoter. Like, I'm here to race this, but you're going to take care of me. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I don't necessarily, well, I don't know what you get from that, but except maybe the performative, hey, I beat my time from last year. I was 10 minutes faster, but time and podium and money and prizes, on our side of the events, it's not a thing.
Right.
Versus other events that are. So I don't know. I am not surprised by the 50-50 split between men and women on the adventure team side, because on the adventure team side, we are working with children, and it's a caretaking role to some degree. I think that would be more welcoming for women versus some of these other events that could be viewed as these big hardcore ultra endurance events. But it's fantastic to see that both sides are bringing in a fairly balanced community of kids, men and women.
Right.
So when are you going to do Margie?
I might never do Margie. We'll see.
I've been waiting to ask this question.
I'm sure you have. I mean, it's sort of not my type of riding. Not what I normally
Meaning what? Single
ride.
track?
Or the technical single track. I mean, it's more interesting after I volunteered at it last year, so maybe I'll get there eventually.
Oh, that's true. If I talk you into
right,
doing it,
then you need a volunteer coordinator. You might just be happy I never do it.
No, I'm going to try to get you to do it.
When are you going to do a Margie EX course? There's my question back.
Boy, that's a good question. There's a couple of pieces of private property that we'd have to route around it for an EX, because there's a couple of pieces that we can only access during the day or the weekend of the event. So it's the single track, the technical riding, that is the barrier.
Yeah, and maybe the amount of time some of those riders are out there. That's a long day out there.
Yeah. Well, how long you've done the 100 EX Crusher? How long were you out for?
Yeah, we were out there. I don't know what's cut off, 24 hours. We were probably out there like 20. We definitely were out there in the dark, which was really kind of fun after we got used to it, but was something new for us. That was the year that the river was really high, and you texted everybody the morning of and said, hey, be careful. The river might be running kind of fast. And I was like, we're already out here.
Yeah, the Dead River. It was pretty enhanced that year. It was high. Was that 21?
No, because
it might have been 22.
It might have been 22, yeah.
That would have been 22, because I think it was 22 that we took a group of 906 kids out to do the course with a bunch of coaches, and the river was still high at that time. And we had to help the kids across with their bikes because, I think Cable was on that ride. He weighed like 70 pounds at the time. If he was going to go across with his bike sideways, that the current would take him. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was really fast. But so if you were out for 20 hours on Crusher EX, you could do the Margie Gessick 50.
Maybe.
Oh, yeah. You could.
I think
what would you have to do to be ready for it?
I'd have to ride some of that trail and be much better at it. I think the other thing about the EX is like that's fun or exciting or interesting is that there's not really an easy point to bail ever, right? Like,
oh, for sure.
I mean,
that's a huge part of it.
You kind of got to wrap your head around that. You're not coming to the river and saying, well, there's a car to pick me up. There's not a car to pick you up.
Yeah.
You're going to walk a long way, or somebody's going to drive a long way to get you, and you are back out there. And I think I appreciate that, right? Like, it's not...
Once you're in, you're in.
Once you're in, you're in.
Yeah, I think that's also probably a big part of the reason, aside from how hard it is, why the quitting rate is so much higher for Margie. It's easy to quit. You're really always in town or a couple miles from rolling off the trail and just being done, saying, screw it, I'm done with this. Crusher, you can't do that. No.
And that's what I say, if you have a partner, you need to have the same sort of perspective on that, right? We always say if one of us is going to the hospital or we have a mechanical we can't fix is the only way we're not finishing.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Crusher's different, in my opinion. Both Margie's hard, Crusher's hard, especially when you start getting into that 100 mile and the 225 on the Crusher, because now you're moving in to an area where there's a lot of people who are going to do it, and they're going to have to, maybe for the first time, ride at night, like you mentioned, you and Kim did. That's a whole different animal.
It was beautiful, though.
Oh, it is. Night riding is, it's fantastic, but you got to have lights. You know, you've got to know how long your lights will last. You need to understand that you should have backups for the lights, and maybe even backups for the backups, because you don't know what will happen. That is just a different type of event to me. I think it puts us into a more natural environment that we haven't experienced in a very, very long time as people. Because you get put out into the middle of nowhere, in the wilderness, alone or with a friend, and it's just you. And you kind of know that you're this autonomous party or person who has to get him or herself back to where you came from. That is a rare experience for a lot of people nowadays.
And you better believe you're going to be uncomfortable at some point, and you better be okay with that, because you can't just easily bail.
Well, you're accepting, I think, in the events, and whether it's EX or MS, there is an assumption of discomfort that comes with it. There's probably absolutely no scenario where you're not going to be highly uncomfortable at some point, right?
Especially because you like to make us have wet feet.
Yeah. But, you know, if you think about that, contrast the events where it's inherently enhanced, or we embrace that idea of doing hard things, and you know there's going to be some sort of obstacles thrown in the way that are just ridiculous, like trail of no return, you know, where you literally have to push your bike straight up. I don't even know if you could call it a trail. It's like a skid trail from logging years ago. It's like on one side in our day-to-day life, civilized lives, we're, you know, wrapping everything in foam and bubble wrap and curating as much comfort as possible, which creates a different experience. And then you have this other avenue you can go down with the events, and it is just assumed to be, this is going to be incredibly uncomfortable. I think that there's something valuable in that.
No, I agree.
Not that we want to continuously live our lives in discomfort.
No, it's nice to have creature comforts too.
Absolutely. But you still have to have the ability to weather and withstand and endure some discomfort and figure out ways to work through it. Mm-hmm. Would you ever do the 225 EX?
I mean, that sounds better to me than the Margie. I can train for that.
Oh, that 225 that's tough.
No,
it's tough.
I should choose the Margie over that?
No, I'm not saying that. It's just that's
no, it all sounds hard.
What's the cutoff on that right now? Like 42 hours? It's interesting to see people do that one, because I think the wild card in the Lawn Crusher is the sleep deprivation.
Yeah, I was going to say, I do like to sleep once in a while.
The sleep deprivation gets people. If you haven't done it, if you haven't worked a job, or if you haven't worked nights, you're at a disadvantage.
I can just keep volunteering for Margie and then have sleep deprivation all weekend. And
Yeah. But if you can get through the sleep deprivation part, like that, I remember in 2019 when we did the first point-to-point crusher, we started everybody from Copper Harbor on a Saturday and sent them out. And then Chris Anderson, who was the registration czar at that time, he was with me the entire day Saturday. We were kind of just leapfrogging racers as they came down out of the Keweenaw toward Lance. And then we waited in Lance because there was a checkpoint there. Everybody had to get through that checkpoint, I think, by 2 a.m. or they were cut. So we stayed in Lance until the cutoff, and we knew everybody was beyond the cutoff or out. And then we kind of cleaned everything up, and then we crashed for like 2 hours. And then we got up, and as we were driving back to Marquette to go to Forestville, where the finish line was, I will never forget the sun coming up at like 6-ish, 5:45, 6:15, somewhere there. And I looked over at Chris as we're driving out of the Lance Berga area, And I just smiled and I'm like, this is going to give them their second win. Because I was, kind of picturing myself where the racers were. They had just gone through the night. You know how the nights are up here. It gets really cold. And there's something about that sun when it comes up the second day, when you're in your second morning of an event, where it's like
Hope.
there's hope. Yeah, it's like you could feel that warm. You remember that morning? We've talked about it with when we last did the Crusher. It was, did it get down to 26? Got down to 26 degrees in August out on the Pashiki, and we really never stopped moving throughout the entire night. You just had to keep going. You're wet. It's 28 degrees. You're cold, but you just keep pushing. You don't think about it. And when the sun started to come up, as we were getting to the Pashiki, everything, because of how cold it had gotten, was white. Everything in the landscape was frosted. Everything. It was the wildest thing I've ever seen. I mean, I grew up in the UP. I've lived in the UP a lot. I've never seen anything like it. And when the sun hit that and the
sparkly,
the vapor and everything started to melt away, it was the most insane thing I've ever seen. I'll never forget it. I'll probably think about it on my deathbed. But that kind of stuff is awesome. It's just like your second wind is right there. That's what's awesome about the Crusher. That's fantastic. Because, at Margie, at that point in the morning, you got like an hour and a half left before cutoff. For Crusher, on Sunday morning at, let's say, 7:30 a.m., you've got like another 10 hours or 15 hours that you can be out there. That's the next level. That's the next level. It's good stuff. How has, and maybe there's been nothing to report, but how has the experience of the events impacted you outside of the events?
Yeah, I was trying to think about, I figured that question was coming. So I was trying to think about, I don't think it's like an obvious, like, it changed me how I live my everyday life, like with one solid example. But I think that it does change how you live your life. Like I'm much more tolerant of discomfort, I think, after doing the X races, right, where you have to wrap your head around being uncomfortable. I think I have a higher tolerance, whether it's in gym workouts or whatever, right, or just everyday life of being uncomfortable. I think I'm less, I'm a better supervisor at work. Like I'm less reactive. I'm more like, okay, well, that's interesting. Let's think about how we might overcome that, right? Or let's think about ways to problem solve that. I think that...
You think the events have
I just
helped?
think, I mean, or maybe it's just age, but I think like doing hard... Yeah, I do. I think that you get... I think it works your brain differently, right? You can be okay with being uncomfortable the more times you put yourself in those positions. And the more times you say, that's okay. I can do that. I can work through that. So I don't know if it's a combination of things, but I do think that being okay with being, like, let's just say doing hard things or being uncomfortable, whatever hard things are for you personally, or for me personally, right, are the more you get used to that and the more times you train yourself to say, I don't need to overreact to this situation. I can step back and I can think about, right, what do I do with this?
So
it's okay.
Yeah, you just triggered a thought in my head. My wife is a planner. She's a self-described planner, and I am the complete opposite. There are things that if I'm going to go do Crusher, then yes, I'm going to have my shit together. I'm going to have a plan for that. But I tend to operate in a very flexible mindset to not overstructure a plan because, well, like when we went out for Project Adventurous, the first time around the UP, 10 days, the only thing we only knew one thing, two things, where we were starting and what time. Aside from that, we did not lay out a plan for the 10 days because we're like, why are we going to plan out these 10 days? At the end of the first day, the entire plan could be in the toilet. And then what happens is you end up panicking, you've got anxiety. Oh my God, we're behind plan. Like the plan is actually sometimes the thing that creates the failure if it doesn't go to plan. So when I was listening to you talk about the events and the impact as far as like working through hard stuff, working through things with staff, etc., it made me think about the way that our events kind of intentionally line things up so that it's not going to go to plan. And teaching, putting you in those situations, reoccurring situations where, oh great, here's another crusher that isn't going to plan, but then learning how to adapt through that and operate from a position of confidence without a plan per se. The only plan being, I'm going to finish this thing.
One way or another, I'm going to finish it. Well, last year we dropped a bike the day that we were on our way to do the crusher. So dropped a bike off the back of the car. So already we were at plan B from the get-go. Yeah, I mean, okay, we'll just start tomorrow instead, right? Luckily, we had the time to do that.
You said, so this idea of having a plan and working the plan versus being comfortable operating without a plan. You had said you were a good student going back way back.
I was. I liked school.
So you were a good student, but what does that mean you were a good student? What made you a good student, or what makes a good student?
I was good at understanding the expectations of the teacher. I would call it today like playing the game, right? Like playing the game of school. But I was good at understanding the adults' expectations, and I was good at meeting those expectations. And even though I think sometimes we're not, as adults, we're not explicit, right, about our expectations. So they're almost like hidden expectations, or they're almost like not said out loud, right? And so I was probably even pretty good at those, right? Just understanding like the hidden curriculum or the hidden expectations in the classroom. Mostly I was, I played the game of school well. I always got good grades. It was easy for me. And I can see that with my siblings, like that's not always the case, right? Some of them had to work a lot harder at that. I don't know that set me up to be the best educator. I think I had to unlearn some of that to be a good teacher, right? Because that's a pretty easy place to come from.
Well, it seems like it's some of the stuff that would make you successful in a traditional environment would hinder you in, say, your makerspace.
Right.
Because I think in a traditional learning environment where there's a curriculum that's laid out, it's like that's kind of the plan, and you need to play the game and just go along executing the plan and understand how to meet expectations. Versus the makerspace, it sounds very unstructured. Or more unstructured.
Even later in my teaching career, right? Like I taught from a perspective of, call it modeling, but I taught from a perspective of, I don't, like in science or math, we might just ask you to understand formulas or regurgitate vocabulary words. We do plenty of that in science and math, right?
Sure.
But really understanding and being able to describe what it is you're doing is a lot more difficult than just applying a formula. Understanding why you're applying it and how it works out and why you might choose that formula over another one, or the idea, right? Like those things are more difficult both to assess as a teacher because it's not a nice little tidy answer sometimes, and also to be that student, right? Because now there's not like just one right answer. I might explain it and there's not just this right vocabulary answer. I'm not just circling a word. I'm not just putting in a number for a formula if I have to describe and understand what I'm doing. So I don't know that I would have been a great student at that, right? That like later in my career, the students that were really good at school often struggled with those other things. So the student that's also really good in the makerspace is not necessarily. Usually students who are good at school will do well no matter what, right, in the makerspace or any situation. But the kids that do really well in the makerspace and I think really see themselves as makers or that sort of fits their worldview are not necessarily your best students in school because it's kind of two different games. Related.
Yeah. Boy, listening to you describe that, I mean, it makes me think that I was a makerspace kid.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never been in one, but I moved out of my parents' house as a junior in high school and then worked a full-time job and went to school as a senior in high school, living from an efficiency apartment. And my issue with school always was it felt like you were on the rails. That's how I felt. Like there wasn't freedom there. I was being told what to think. I'm not saying that I was. It's just what it felt like. It felt like I wasn't the right fit for that. So I got through that, but then I skipped going to college and I just went into the workforce. And I've done really different things. I worked fast food, worked in a management position during my senior year, working fast food. Did that for a bit. Moved from that to retail, worked retail up until 21. And then at 21, and all these different experiences, working through that retail environment and getting, I was like assistant manager here, assistant manager there, assistant manager here, manager here. And then it's like, oh, all of a sudden I'm 21 and they want to send me down to Naperville, Illinois to go into the management trainee program, like into store management. And there was a moment when I was 21, I'm like, if I go to Naperville, this is what I'm doing for the rest of my life. I'm not sure I want to do this for the rest of my life. So I left that. I was making good money. I mean, at that time, probably $60,000 a year. Left that, become a part-time truck driver. Like, I went from retail environment office manager working with 40 cashiers, all of them old enough to be my mom or my grandma, to being a part-time truck driver, running food. But each of those experiences felt like a makerspace where it's all problem solving.
Right.
There's no curriculum, there's no clear path, there's no rails. You are free to move about and sort of interact with the environment and do things and break things and make mistakes and then learn from it. And each stop along the way, it was an iteration of who I was as a person. But I couldn't have done that in a traditional college. I don't think I could have done that in a college environment.
Right.
My oldest, Gavin, so he's going to be a senior this coming year. But it was interesting because he is going to school. He's in college. And as he got in to his first couple of years, he is somewhat, to a degree, in some ways wired like me. He's looking at some of the stuff he has to do, some of the classes. And he's like, what is the point of this? When am I going to ever use this in life? This is a waste of my time. You're charging me a bunch of money. It's a waste of money. This is ridiculous. My wife and his uncle and his uncle's wife, all of them went through the traditional path of education, high school, college. They have degrees. It's interesting to look at their perspective versus my perspective because they essentially were saying, well, going back to something you said earlier, yeah, some of this maybe isn't what you're going to use in life, but it's kind of like playing the game. This is how you prove that you can learn. This is essentially how you prove that you can just do what you're told to do. That was their explanation. Like, it's just what you got to do. You just got to get through it. Then you move on.
And I want to give a caveat just to people listening that we don't think that kids fall. I mean, we're talking about ourselves as two different types of learners, and we know that there's kids fall in the whole continuum of that spectrum, right?
100%.
But also, sometimes I think too, and I'm not saying that universities do take this wide breadth of courses for this reason, but sometimes I think like kids don't know what they don't like or do like until they try some things too. And that's not necessarily a great reason, like spend 3 credit hours worth of dollars on this course that you don't like or don't want to be in. I'm not justifying it that way, but I am suggesting that sometimes, right, when we have this wide breadth of classes, people find things that they wouldn't know they otherwise were interested in, or it expands their worldview in some way.
Well, I agree with you.
But I was angry about it too when I was an undergrad, so.
I think, so in the same way that we talk about youth competitive sports versus, let's say, adventure team, where it's It's not a team-driven, win-lose scenario. That's not the priority. That creates a spectrum or a contrast. There's options. I think you need both. I think both should be there. I think both are equally important. In this case, with traditional education, I'd almost say that you're almost told you have to go to college. I actually was told you have to have a degree. If you don't have a degree, you're going nowhere. Even if there was just this path for education that's more traditional, there are people who are going to need that, want that, and enjoy that. What about, this makerspace, as you're calling it, if there was just an alternative path? And I don't know, maybe that's the trades.
Right. I do think the trades weren't as popular as they were once, right? For many years that people did talk more about 2 or 4 year degrees. And I do think the trades are having a bit of a comeback and that people are seeing value in that. And I do think that is another option for students who are interested in those fields. I think 2-year colleges have become a little bit more prevalent as well.
Yeah, if I look back, truck driving, that was a hoot.
I bet.
I mean, when you're 21, there's so many benefits to it. You made good money. You take the truck out. You do your job that day. You deliver all the food that's on the truck. You drive back to the depot, maybe by 5, 7 at the latest. You're done. You park the truck. You don't have anything to think about until you go back and get back in that truck in the morning. Nothing. Allowed for a lot of flexibility. Now, I wasn't over the road. I was a local driver, regional, so home most nights. But that was fantastic. Met a lot of really interesting people doing that job. I drove tanker around Michigan and Wisconsin. So airline fuel, high sulfur diesel, gasoline, I don't know, whatever else we put on the truck. That was an interesting job. In reflection, it was a terrible job. Just, the stuff that you're doing, the fuel, the fumes, the old timers that I would meet at the terminals when we were filling the tanker. I mean, quite a few of those guys were like on respirators while they're filling the truck up because they'd been doing it so long. It was just not good. I'd recommend doing it, but not for a long time. But those jobs, there's so much about those jobs that are good. And I agree with you. I think the trade jobs like that, other jobs are making a comeback, and I think that they're super important. I mean, the whole basis of what we have is based on people doing those jobs and doing those jobs well. Mm-hmm. And you can just learn so much, and you see so much too. We need a makerspace for adults.
We do. There are I don't know that Marquette has one, but there are maker spaces for adults. The premise in adult maker space is that they put tools there and training there that you wouldn't otherwise necessarily have available to you at home. So like a big CNC machine or a big, right, like things that you would want to, because you have a project that you're working on and the tools are too expensive or you don't have the space for them at home. So much like you pay a gym membership, you pay a membership to the space that allows you, and you don't have to clean up then. I mean, you have to clean up your space at the maker space, but at home, you don't have this whole workshop.
Where are these? Are these at universities?
No, they're usually sometimes public libraries, sometimes old buildings in cities, like somebody will make one. Usually you have to have a fair bit of space, right? If you're going to have welding or CNC or whatever it is. I mean, we don't have a lot of, because we're for children, I mean, we have sublimation printer and a laser cutter and a 3D printer. Like we have some things, but we don't have that kind of space that an adult makerspace would have.
How common are they? I've never heard of this.
They're pretty common. I mean,
is there one in Midland?
We don't have one in Mount Pleasant, but like Lansing has one.
Where is it in Lansing?
I'd have to look.
Okay. Where else?
I mean, certainly like Detroit would have one. I bet if we looked at public libraries in Michigan, there's a fair number of them.
Interesting.
I don't know if universities usually have them that are open to community members or if they're, like an engineering department would certainly have one, but that might only be open to their students.
Let's go back to Bike Club for a minute.
Okay.
as an educator, I guess, or just somebody who professionally has worked with children in the educational environment. Let's say they've heard of Adventure Team, they've heard of the program, and they've gone to the website, they've read about it. They've watched a couple videos that we have out there, but they're still apprehensive. You know, their daughter's tried volleyball and she's tried basketball, and they weren't good experiences. Why should they put her onto the Adventure Team when it could be another bad experience on top of previous bad experiences?
That's a good question. So I would say that their child should have probably some interest in being on a bike, unless they're just too young to have demonstrated that they don't know yet, right, whether they like being on a bike or not. But also, does have an individual component, so that child is going to learn something about themselves each week, in addition to being a part of a team. And I think there's value in both of those things. We have great coaches. You know, they're going to go out with 3 coaches who are paying attention and who have background checks and training. And so they're unlikely, I think, to have a bad experience with a coach, or they're unlikely to have a bad experience with a coach where that's not communicated to a lead and fixed in a pretty quick manner, right? So I think we have, if they're worried about the way in which their child's treated by an adult, I think that's probably not something we see much of at Adventure Team. So they have conscientious adults. The rider is learning to adventure, and there's time on and off the bike for that. They're learning something about character skills, which is going to serve them on and off the bike. They're learning something about respecting the natural world around them and being in the natural world around them, as well as being on a bike. I just don't see any downsides. We're getting at my other thing lately, which has been this extinction of experience idea. If we're getting at that, right?
Let's talk about that. Sure.
If we're talking about ways in which children have experiences in the natural world, they have much fewer of them these days than they used to.
Why are they important?
And they're important because you learn something about yourself, and you learn to appreciate your natural world. Things that you can't learn by sitting on your device, or things that you can't learn inside your house, right? Like what's living under this rock, or what happens when I poke my stick at, or what kind of berry is this, or even just, having a community of peers, right? So this is a community, a team, and we're not competing against one another on the team, but you're having to talk to one another. You're having to look at one another. You're not continuously, not in an uncomfortable way, because lots of times we are out on bikes, but you are having to learn to work together. So both that natural world experience, which in a non-contrived manner, right? Like we're not forcing kids to go look at the berries or something, but you're just investigating your natural world. Like what's that salamander doing? What's under that rock?
Right.
What's making that noise? Oh, that's a frog, right? Like
they are naturally curious.
Yes.
And they get to explore that.
They get to explore that.
Yeah. What's the difference? Is there a difference between, so I mentioned, and this makes a lot of sense. Like if your child has had multiple bad experiences in some sort of youth activity, you, on one hand, want to get them involved in stuff. You want to find something that is, quote, their thing. But you don't want them to have another bad experience. Is there a difference between always wanting to put your kids into a position where they're successful versus just trying to avoid another bad experience?
Yeah, I guess I don't know how your kid's always going to be successful, right? So I guess it could be safe enough and that it's similar enough to things they've already done. Mm-hmm. But I don't know that that's really helping them grow. And then
What would be a good way to, I mean, if you were to give advice, like to me or Mark or any parent, were your kids going to have bad experiences just
Oh, right.
if they're exploring their world and trying things? I've probably actually failed at more in life than I've succeeded at. But for whatever reason, the failures don't bother me. But how do we, what's the advice for parents if you were to give some? You work with kids all the time.
Yeah, I'm going to tell them to listen to Elizabeth's podcast, but otherwise I would say, yeah, that's a good question. And I don't regularly give parenting advice, so don't think of this as parenting advice, but I do think kids need to try different things. And if they don't feel like they're unsafe, right, at bike club, if you talk to your child who came to bike club, or you talk to them about coming to bike club, and you get them to continue coming to bike club, past the first couple nights where maybe they're uncomfortable and it's new, right? If they're not unsafe, I mean, and they can't articulate to you other than being just maybe uncomfortable because it's new, why wouldn't you encourage them to keep coming, right? Why wouldn't you ask them what they do enjoy about it? Why wouldn't you? Because it's unlikely that they hate everything about it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, perhaps they aren't as good a rider as somebody else, but that's going to come if they keep working at it, right? Or perhaps we didn't stop often enough for snacks and, they were hungry going into the night or whatever, right? It's unlikely that they hate everything about the experience. And I think if you can celebrate the things that they do like and the successes that they do have at bike club and talk to your child about it on the way to bike club and when you pick them up, I can think of very few kids who have been unhappy about something at bike club, right? And repeatedly. I mean, all kids have bad days, but like repeatedly at bike club. I mean, I can think of one young man who was in a group by age that really was too difficult for him. And the minute we allowed him to move down to a group of younger riders, and not significantly younger riders, but move down a group and that was after several weeks. That's really what he wanted. Mm-hmm. He was real happy the rest of the summer, right? So I can't think of anything that we haven't addressed or that has gone on repeatedly that makes kids unhappy. I think more kids find their homes there and come back repeatedly than not.
Are uncomfortable and unsafe the same thing?
No.
How are they different?
I mean, everyone's going to be uncomfortable at some point. We're out there riding for 2 hours, right? Everything's not going to go. If you got 9 teammates, everything's not going to go your way every minute of that 2-hour ride. And so you might be uncomfortable. You might be uncomfortable not being in the lead. You might be uncomfortable stopping too often for a snack. You might be uncomfortable because you're the one pushing the bike up the hill. Whatever it is, right? Like those aren't safety issues. The child is not in danger of sustaining an injury or of being physically or emotionally hurt. They're just having to work a little bit harder through some things that make them uncomfortable. And they can talk about it and they can be unhappy about it.
Do you think that our perception of safety has changed, been modified? It seems like, I feel as though there's a extreme overemphasis on safety versus education on risk assessment, which we've talked about. And you wrote something for the upcoming newsletter. And again, I'm not saying that we ever want to put anybody of any age into an unsafe situation, but the world is inherently unsafe. And I think that you have to step back and realize that, we have created a world that we're trying to make safe within an unsafe world. And that unsafe world is nature, the natural world, and human nature also, to me, is very unsafe. Mm-hmm. So I think that safety is an illusion in some ways. And by convincing people that we're going to come in for you and we're going to make this safe, there's a shift of an accountability for their safety from them to be personally accountable and self-supported because we're taking care of you. But are we really always? I don't think so.
Well, I think a good example of that at Bike Club is we do, right? No rider has to ride anything that they don't want to ride. And what we do when you're going to ride something new is we talk about it and then we walk it and then maybe we push your bike over it. And then if you're ready, we ride it, right? Like
100%.
What a way to teach riders to sort of be accountable on the trail, to be accountable for their own riding on the trail, because that's exactly what you would want riders to do from there on out, rather than to ride something that made them uncomfortable and where they were at risk for injury, no matter what age they're at. So the younger that they learn to do that, to respect how they feel about the trail, to respect the trail, to respect their abilities, right, the less likely they are to get hurt in the future, really. And all you've done is teach the rider that that's the case. Teach the rider to problem solve, to risk assess.
Going back to when you were talking about, teaching children, and you think that your goal,
so you don't need me
through the end of the year, right, is to bring them through this curriculum and this educational experience to the end of the year where now they don't need you. They can take this information and this education you've given them, gifted to them, and they can move forward.
Please, right?
And I think that's exactly where I'm trying to go with this is safety is a very emotional, volatile topic. I'm glad that you brought up Bike Club and how we handle that, because I think that is extremely important that, a child might come in having ridden on, let's say, 2-track, not on single track, but he or she's been on 2-track. It's bumpy, it's dirt, so they've had that experience, and they are, let's say, mildly proficient at pedaling it. The goal will be to incrementally transition them toward, eventually a path that isn't maybe 2-track. Now it's half a 2-track, and we're going to get them down to single track, right? But they're making the choice along the way what they're comfortable doing or not doing on those trails during those rides. But they're always sort of supported, and the ethos is always reinforced that you can't ride that yet. I can't ride that. I'm going to walk that. Okay, that's cool. You can't ride that yet. Maybe next week. And they do start to establish those goals. I think that, I wonder if you think this. I think that when you give the decision-making to them.
Yeah, that's what I mean by autonomy, right? Give the decision-making to them.
When they're given the opportunity to choose to walk or ride, that it's empowering.
Mm-hmm.
I think I mentioned when I talked with Ryan in the first podcast that I think that also sort of develops an element of trust. You're entrusting them to make their own decisions. And then there's just, I don't know, it seems like there's a bond that can create, like, wow, this guy I don't really know who's my coach is like giving me the power, sharing power. I think that what I've seen in Bike Club is that the kids are more likely then to take that and run with it when they're ready to.
Yeah, I would agree.
Do you think when they're pushed to do something that the opposite happens? I mean, obviously, if you push them to do something they're not ready to do.
I'm sure it depends somewhat on the kid, right? Like some kids would hold that against you because you've made them do something that they didn't. Why should anybody be made to do something that they don't feel comfortable doing or they're not ready to do, right?
Well,
so I'm sure some kids would,
That's where safety could become an issue.
Right.
Like if you're going to have them ride this rock roll and they're telling you they're not ready and you're like, just give it a try. That would be dangerous.
Right. The other nice thing about the skills that kids learn at Adventure Team is that those are skills they can practice outside. They don't have to wait till next week at Adventure Team, right?
Right.
You can get on your bike, probably in your yard, probably maybe somewhere else on a trail with an adult, but those are all things that are skills that will serve them outside of Bike Club.
Oh, 100%. I think that the skills that they learn to develop, so I think that the personal development skills, the resilience, the doing hard things, the grit, respect, consistency, those skills support the development of the physical skills on the bike. So the off the bike lessons support the on the bike stuff that then I think becomes sort of just a synergistic cycle of, I can do hard stuff, which is a great lesson for a kid to learn and to start to embrace. We saw that in some responses from parents during the impact survey last year that, doing hard things or we do hard things became family mantras that actually came from bike club and took hold in the home. It's probably my favorite thing in the world is to hear a 5-year-old say that he does hard things and to embrace it.
Right.
And smile through it.
Yeah.
Because typically when you do a hard thing, and sometimes it's still the case, you envision that as being a miserable experience. But I don't know, sometimes the miserable experiences are they're
the ones that stick with you.
They're the best ones.
And they're empowering once you survive it, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've said this with the events. You don't necessarily sit and, wax poetic about the easy days where nothing went wrong. But you'll sit and recount the stuff that happened, the stuff that went wrong, the things that broke, the bike that fell off the bike rack, the day you're supposed to do crusher. I still remember one of the kids, this is when we still had a race team as part of the program. The race team was going across the obstacle course at Tourist Park. And there's I'll say 10 of them. And we had the elevated skinnies set up, all of them in one line. So there's 5 of them. So I don't know what that is, 20 feet elevated. It's only, 6 inches off the ground. But nonetheless, they're just in this pace line going over the elevated skinny. And I was sitting watching it. First I'm thinking, wow, this is really awesome because they're really good riders. And then I started to think, somebody's going to end up eating shit here. And somebody did, end up going, they came off right before they went down the exit ramp. He went off the elevated skinny and he hit the box and ejected right over the front of the bike over the handlebars. And unfortunately for him, I happened to be there recording it. So we still have it. But it's those things where we'll never forget that. He'll never forget that. Every time I see him, we kind of chuckle about it. He was okay. He was shook up. His bike was okay. But it's just another example of that experience left an impression on him.
Sure.
How are we doing on time? 10:08. How are you doing? Where did Elizabeth go? Was she just bored listening to us? What else we got? We have anything else before we split out of here? We got Tony at 11.
Yeah, I don't think so.
This has been good. I appreciate you sitting down with me to talk about this. I also appreciate everything that you do.
Well, thank you.
For the programming, for the events, volunteer, board of directors. You're valuable to us.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate the time and the energy that you put into it.
It's nice to be a part of the team.
Yeah, I think that we've got a pretty good team. I think I'm always sort of blown away by the fact that, you live where?
Downstate, Mount Pleasant.
Yeah, so you live in Mount Pleasant, which is how many hours away from Marquette, Michigan?
5-ish.
5-ish. The number of people with similar stories to that
Right.
That have dedicated themselves toward this work and this mission and this endeavor, it will never cease to just blow me away, because it would be much easier for you to just stay at home, do something.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember, but I practically begged you to let me be on the board. So I don't know if you even could have said no, because I was I was determined.
I remember actually. Okay, so since you brought that up, that was 2021.
It's probably right. It wasn't long after I did the event, right? And then I figured out what the youth piece of it was.
Yeah, I remember looking at your resume
Mm-hmm.
And honest to God, I remember reading it and I was impressed by it. And I'm like, why the hell does she want to hang out with us? Like,
And I
she
just
seems
keep
way,
showing up.
she just seems way above our pay grade. But you were persistent.
I was persistent.
And
determined.
Yeah, you were determined and you've gotten involved. And now, I mean, it's literally like 4 years-ish, 3, 4.
Yeah.
Well, that would have been late in 21. So, well, we'll call 4 years, whatever. Everybody knows that.
You said I could be on the board and a lead of a community. I didn't know what that meant either, but.
Exactly. But yeah, it's amazing to look at that and just to look at the different ways you've been involved in the organization, the fact that you would want to be part of it when it's not anything you're attached to at home. It almost feels like to some degree this is becoming home.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the UP.
I do like it north of the bridge.
Yeah. Yeah. What would you say to somebody who maybe listens to this and thinks at the end, man, I'd love to get involved? What would you tell them?
Yeah, I'd say no time like the present, right? I mean, there's a lot of different ways to get involved. So there's volunteering with events up here. There's volunteering with one of the community adventure teams. And you don't have to ride a bike, right? There's other ways to get involved.
Sure.
Some communities have running clubs, and everybody has off the bike responsibilities. Everybody has base camp responsibilities. So I think there's a lot of different ways to get involved.
What's it like?
Always giving.
What is it like to volunteer for 906 Adventure Team?
Well, we have a lot of, this will be our 4th year with our adventure team, and we have a lot of returning volunteers. So I think they find it, pretty rewarding. Right. I find it very rewarding. I always say that I learn as much from the kids, from the riders, as I do, right, from my own rides or my own time on the trails.
Sure.
I think as adults, we very rarely are asked to be outside of our own heads. And it's especially when I volunteer with the 5 and 6-year-olds, it's 2 hours a week in which I really just need to show up for them, right? It's not about me. It's really just about them and their ride. And I find that to be so valuable. It doesn't matter what else is going on in my life, what other chaos I have at work, anything. You show up, you are present for kids for 2 hours, and it's so rewarding. So I feel like as volunteers, we get as much out of it as the riders do.
Do you get the same out of volunteering for the events?
I get a different experience out of that. I will say that again, the 906 Adventure Team community and the event community they're fabulous people, right? Their stories and their dedication and the reasons that they do the events and the reasons that they quit or don't quit events, right? I think that's rewarding in a different way. And I get, what do I get out of just volunteering in general? I mean, of course I get something out of it, right? I get to choose to use whatever leadership skills I have or am developing in a way that is very fulfilling, right?
Yeah. I agree that you definitely can see, I've heard this from other adults too on the youth side who volunteer to ride with the kids or just work at base camp. They end up feeling at the end of the year that they've got it as much from that experience as the kids have. I feel the same way about the adult events. I've stood at the finish line of every one of our events for the last 11 years. It's really just a great opportunity to sit and experience a person's success or utter defeat and share the moment with them. A lot of people have asked me, oh, you're going to do Margie this year? Or, oh, you're going to do Crusher this year? And my answer's always been, and I don't think that people understand this or get it, or maybe they just don't even think about it, but when we're running the events, that's their day. Mm-hmm. My job is very clear to me. I'm there to provide the opportunity. I'm not there to determine if you can finish or not. I'm not there to tell you what this should be or not be to yourself, for you, in your life. If you don't like it, great, go do something else. I'm good with it either way. But those days are for you, or those days are for them. And I'm just there with the team to provide it, the opportunity. And that's been, maybe that's a great piece of advice for somebody who just can't seem to, find some bright light or North Star. Is get out of your head. Just start doing stuff for other people. Because I think there's something to that when you're showing up just to be part of a community. You're showing up to do something for somebody else. Yeah, it's not to say that you're not getting something from it, like you noted. You are getting something from it, but it's less focused on me, and it's more focused on you. And there just seems to be something different about that. And then when you get a group of people together that are doing that, it seems really different. All right. Well, we should probably get out of here. I'm going to keep working on you to do Margie. This is not over.
Okay.
We'll negotiate. Maybe Mark and I will we're going to come up with a plan this
Mark's
weekend.
a real good negotiator.
We're going to come up with a plan this weekend, and we're going to negotiate a Margie Gessick 50 with Julie Cunningham.
Okay.
Out.